Don't you just love paying taxes? No? Well, neither did the subjects of medieval kings. But since medieval kings wrote most of our history, instances of struggle and resistance are kind of rare in the historical record, except in one truly extraordinary case. In the 11th century, seeking to rein in their wealthy feudal lords, the Palas of Bengal attempted to tighten their grip on the countryside through taxation. In short order, this led to a rebellion that killed two kings, transformed Bengal's political economy, ended the 300-year reign of the Palas, and opened the region up to the arrival of Turkic raiders. This is the story of the Kaivarta Rebellion, the most important revolt we never hear about. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti, historian author of Lords of the Deccan. Welcome to Thinking Medieval, where every week we tell you something new about our complex, innovative past. Always feel free to check out our research and citations below, and remember that we're all figuring out how to think about our messy, bloody, dazzling history. I'm often asked which period of history would I like to live in. I find this question very interesting because the assumption is that I would be living in a royal court. But for most of human history, the royal court was a space of unimaginable luxury sustained by the extraction of resources from territories under military and ideological domination. The average Indian, like most of my ancestors, lived in tough agrarian circumstances. India was not a land of milk and honey, of course, and court-commissioned texts droned on endlessly about the quaintness of village life, how kings brought endless prosperity to their subjects, and so on. But if you take those claims literally, as sound Twitter users tend to do, you might think that pre-modern South Asia miraculously suffered none of the challenges that the rest of the world did. We'd get the impression that peasants and tenant farmers were always delighted to pay tax, donate to temples, give their labor to local strongmen, or adhere to rules imposed on them by kings. But once in a while, something slips through the cracks. While it's possible to find examples throughout South Asia, here's one inscription I've come across from the medieval Deccan. Dating to 1230 CE during the reign of Narasimha II of the Hoysala dynasty of South Karnataka, it records the death of one Maraya Peraya, son of Harimara Gowda of Haltore village. Narasimha II had ordered the village granted to Brahmins, to which the peasant landholders of Haltore had initially agreed, but at some point they realized that this would mean the loss of their property and refused to uphold the agreement. The king's cavalry then attacked the village, killed the men, plundered the homes, and quote-unquote unloosed the waists of women, referring to mass rape. The surviving villagers had to submit to royal authority but quietly made gifts to the families of the dead. The residents of Haltore cannot have known it, but less than a century earlier in Bengal, a much larger peasant uprising had actually forced the king to come to terms. In the late 11th century, like Hoysala Narasimha II, King Mahipala II of the Pala Dynasty sought to settle Brahmin officials in his core territories. It was a necessary move from his perspective. When the Pala dynasty had first established its power throughout Bengal and Bihar in the 8th century CE, it had made colossal endowments to Buddhist super monasteries. These religious institutions waxed mighty as Pala vassals used them for pious tax evasion. Now, these vassals generally owned lands in Pala territories, but by donating them to monasteries, they deprived the Pala state of crucial revenues while accruing religious merit for themselves. In Characteristics of the Kaivarta Rebellion delineated from the Rāmacarita, historian Ryosuke Furui shows how the Palas tried to solve this problem by extending their control directly into the countryside. Highly trained Shaivite Brahmins who could perform both religious services and act as state officials were granted control of villages. Vassal lords were stopped from making tax-free donations, and land taxes were assessed in currency, and extensive surveys were conducted. It was a systematic, top-down attempt at medieval centralization, but it was too much and had come too late. The spark of rebellion was lit. The leaders of the ensuing uprising were not peasants though, which is part of the reason its story survived. Instead, Divya and Bhima, two aristocrats descended from boatmen or Kaivartas, spearheaded a revolt of the landed elite, who were obviously discomfited by Pala attempts to tax them effectively. They were also supported quietly by cultivators. Now, King Mahipala II responded with overconfidence. According to the Rāmacarita of Sandhyakaranandin, love those medieval Sanskrit names, he was surrounded and killed in battle. His brother Ramapala fled to the outer territories of the Palas in eastern Bihar and western Bengal. These regions were ruled by equally powerful vassals. As Furui notes, they are described as the appropriators of Brahmin settlements and of entire countries. Among them were the Rashtrakutas of Anga, Ramapala's maternal relations, a branch of the famous but by then extinct Imperial Rashtrakutas of the Deccan. More about them in my book. With extravagant promises of land and massive bribes of gold, Ramapala convinced his remaining vassals to fight back the Kaivarta rebels. On a fleet of boats, an advanced strike force attacked Bhima Kaivarta, who had begun land reforms of his own. He was defeated but escaped captivity. At this point, a massive popular uprising swelled his armies. The people didn't want a Pala restoration with the taxation and control that came with it. Bhima raised a new army of cultivators, but they were practically naked, poorly trained, and even, according to the Rāmacarita, rode into battle on buffaloes. The royal forces routed them without mercy, capturing Bhima and his family. He was forced to watch them all executed before his own death. Now, the Kaivarta Rebellion was crushed, but it led to irrevocable change. For generations after, the Palas weren't able to restore control as property records had been destroyed. And they had given away far too much to their vassals, all of whom had ambitions of their own. By 1165, they had been driven away in ignominy. By then, Turkic horse traders had established networks deep into the Gangetic plains, and Turkic power was on the ascendant to the northwest. In the chaos that would ensue in subsequent decades, the Kaivartas were forgotten, but they survive today as a faint reminder. The medieval world was not a utopia, nor was it one of complete and benevolent royal domination. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and at Connected Histories, and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.